For years, I've told people the same thing. If you want to play Nintendo DS or 3DS games, just go on eBay, go to your local retro game store, buy a used 3DS. Emulation is not there yet. But honestly, I'm not sure I can say that anymore. And really, I'm just surprised at how quickly the shift happened. So let's talk about how we got here and where we're going next by diving into two handhelds that people can't stop talking about: the AYN Thor and the Anbernic RG DS. Okay, so starting out, I think I just need to make the case for original hardware. First of all, Nintendo's build quality is second to none, and if you're buying a DS or a 3DS, you know that compatibility is going to be 100% across the board. There's an obvious nostalgia factor built in here. Personally, I think that the Nintendo DSi, and I've said this before, is the most beautiful device Nintendo has ever made. I also have a really strong emotional attachment to my 3DS, which is the non-XL new 3DS. I imported some Animal Crossing faceplates from Japan. I love this thing, but it's starting to literally actually decompose. The circle pad on here is just inexplicably sticky now. I'm sure I could go online and buy a replacement circle pad and fix it, but man, it's just kind of disappointing that this is the case in the first place. The DSi and the 3DS are both exceptional devices because they both have SD card slots, which means you could just throw every DS or 3DS game on there and be off to the races. And in both cases, you could even be playing other games like Game Boy games or Super Nintendo games. There are myriad ways of using the 3DS, for example, as your primary emulation handheld and the best way of playing 3DS games. That rules, don't get me wrong. I think for most people, that's still the answer. Go to eBay, buy a 3DS. But a major issue that's kind of upended the play on original hardware side of things is that Nintendo shut down the 3DS eShop, which means a lot of games are just stranded out in the middle of nowhere, unplayable and unbuyable. When Nintendo announced they were shutting down the eShop, that kind of created this like mad rush land grab for people to just buy up as many 3DSs and games as they possibly could, which has sent most of these prices skyrocketing. There were many reasons to go with original hardware over emulation devices a while ago, and one of them was price, really until recently. By choosing to take their library and shove it into a vault, Nintendo has now opened up this huge demand for people who want to relive the games that they grew up with and have no way of accessing them. Which is why when emulation devices come along that look like they can fill that nostalgia-shaped hole, and Nintendo isn't addressing it themselves, most people will go chase that emulation device. And look, I'm a big proponent of taking your Nintendo DSi and bringing it on the bus or the subway or whatever. There is something that feels amazing about it. You can't overlook the nostalgia factor here. But man, there are some great handhelds out there now. The first of which you've definitely heard of. It's the AYN Thor. AYN stands for All You Need. Did you know that? The AYN Thor is getting a lot of press pickup and a lot of people are talking about it because it is exceptional in basically every single way. And this is how AYN has kind of built its reputation already over the years. The first device that they built that really broke out was the AYN Odin 2. The first Odin was great, but the 2 was the one that I think people really glommed onto. The reason for that was for a reasonable price, you could get a handheld that kind of looked like the Nintendo Switch Lite, and it could play everything up through GameCube and PS2 and even some Switch stuff, and it didn't even break a sweat. The thing was that the Odin 2 was so powerful that it was limited by the software emulators and not by the hardware actually in the device itself. The Thor takes the internals of the Odin 2 and shoves them into a dual-screen device. Both screens are OLED as well. So let's get the most important thing out of the way. The Thor plays almost every single 3DS game at 2 or 3 times resolution very comfortably. And just like the Odin 2, the games that don't work are more a compatibility problem and not a problem with the power of the hardware itself. And also like the Odin 2, this thing can play up through GameCube and PS2 comfortably, and in some cases even emulate PC games, which is pretty wild. I got the Thor right when it came out, and the thing I've been most surprised by after using it for months and months at this point is how often I'm using each screen independently. The top screen is 16:9, and I've been using it to stream Persona 4 Golden from my PC, and using the bottom screen to have open like a walkthrough or a guide or something. But then in your most like brain-rotty moments, you could also just be playing a game on the top screen and have like a YouTube video or a podcast open on the bottom screen, or vice versa if you want. And because it's really popped off in popularity, it also means that it's getting a lot of support from like community-run projects. There are a lot of people out there building cool stuff for the Thor all the time. It feels like a platform being invested in despite it technically just being like a device you should be using to play 3DS and DS games. The one hitch about the Thor, though, and even compared to the increased prices of 3DSs on the secondhand market, is that the Thor starts at $250, which is like a decent price, but the one you should really probably buy starts at $310, and the one that I would actually recommend to people is $370. And that's a lot of money. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that's not a lot of money. It's more affordable than you would think, considering, the specs that are in this thing, but even still, $370, brother, a big chunk of change. Which is, I think, why people got so excited about this thing. This is the Anbernic RG DS. It's a device that looks almost exactly like the XL version of my beloved Nintendo DSi. It just has some analog sticks on the bottom and pushes the D-pad and the face buttons to the top. And let me just say, right off the bat, I've been using this for a bit, and it is significantly more comfortable than the Thor to play for long periods of time. Most people I know who have a Thor have eventually gotten to the point where they want to use a grip, like they'll buy a secondhand grip and attach it to the Thor. That is not the case at all with the RGDS. This thing is so comfortable, and it's mainly just because they push the D-pad and the face buttons to the top. It just feels so comfortable. And in general, the build quality of this thing is one of its standout features. It just actually feels like a device that Nintendo might have made. And on top of that, the other big feature, it's $100, and sometimes it's even cheaper. What's the catch? I hear you asking. Well, dear viewer, there are a couple. There are a couple catches, if I'm being honest. The first is that there's this kind of history of the RGDS being advertised as something that it's not. When they first announced it, Anbernic was showing it playing things like 3DS games, which, let me just be real with you, it is not powerful enough to do. I'm not sure why they did that. It seems like a bad idea. Really seems like it would just piss people off instead of getting them excited, and it did. It did piss people off. The second thing is that when it launched, it also couldn't even play Nintendo DS games very well, which is pretty embarrassing. The nice happy ending here is that there were a couple software updates that came out that fixed those problems, making Nintendo DS games, at least, run great. And because it's been out for a little while, there are now community-built tools and front ends that allow you to change the way the device works and operates, so you can kind of tweak it to your heart's content. I will say, though, this kind of feels like a you-get-what-you-pay-for device more than anything. At $100, yes, you can play just about every single Nintendo DS game, and it's going to run pretty well, but some of them can't be upscaled even past 1x, if I'm being honest. And even in some instances where I'm trying to play games like Game Boy Advance games on here, because, it doesn't only play Nintendo DS games, I have moments where, it doesn't know what screen to put the game on, and sometimes even when it puts a game on a screen and I start pressing buttons, it'll start controlling the bottom screen even though the game is on the top screen. And it just seems to randomly decide when to do these things also. There's no real rhyme or reason for it that I have found, at least in my testing. But just to make this point extremely clear, for $100 or less, you can buy a device that feels amazing in the hand and will play every single Nintendo DS game with a bunch of quality of life improvements. Like, for example, in some cases being able to increase the resolution, or maybe most importantly, the addition of save states and load states. So if you're shiny hunting in Pokemon or something, baby, you got a stew going. Let's just break this down real quick. Let's talk about these options. For $100 or less, which is cheaper than you will probably get any DS or 3DS on the used market, you can get something that will play every single Nintendo DS game with a bunch of quality of life improvements. You're just going to have to deal with some tweaking here and there in settings, and it's going to be annoying, but once you get it up and running, it should basically just always be up and running. In the middle here is where I would put original hardware, at least in terms of price, and the benefits of original hardware should be obvious at this point. Every single game is going to run perfectly. No fiddling, no messing around with settings and stuff. Maybe nostalgia in particular is the thing that matters most to you. Obviously, original hardware is probably your go-to. And there's also a high likelihood that you have a bunch of these games just kind of lying around somewhere already, and that's the best way to play them. You just have to be okay with the fact that their online services no longer work. And then on the higher end, we have the AYN Thor, which is, I think, increasingly the best way to play a lot of these games. I haven't even talked about all the upsides in emulation here outside of just increasing the resolution and save states, but people have figured out ways of playing games online again. There are texture packs you can download that increase the visual fidelity of a lot of these games in pretty significant ways. The AYN Thor in particular makes a pretty strong case for being an everything device in general, because it can play everything up through PS2 and GameCube and PC stuff as well, and also play dual screen stuff in a way that feels native. man, it's like it covers every single base possible. The only thing is you have to be willing to pay a premium for that. And not a lot of people are, and that's totally understandable. That's why there's a bunch of different options. But even still, you know, I've only listed 2 options in this video that aren't original hardware, but there are others out there. Hey, do you want to spend a lot more money? Guess what? You can do that. Do you want to spend even less money? Guess what? You can do that too. And it's going to look a little weird and it's going to play a little weird, but it still works. And isn't that the most important thing? The most important thing, to be clear, should be playing the video games. I know a lot of people in this hobby just like buy things and then set them up and fiddle around with them, and then they put them in a big bag and that's it. You don't have to do that. You can play the video. You can even finish the video games. I believe in you. But here's the truth. At this moment, we are at an inflection point. A year ago, I would have told you 100% of the time, just buy a used 3DS. And it's wild to think that that's maybe just not the answer anymore. And I think as time goes on and as people buy up stock of used DS and 3DSs, and as Nintendo continues to just ignore those libraries entirely, emulation kind of becomes the go-to answer, and it's only going to get better from here. It's probably not going to get worse, realistically. Original hardware will always have its place. There will always be people who will live and die by the original hardware, and honestly, I'm one of them to a certain extent. There's a reason I still have these devices in my possession. I love them dearly. But as a person who makes videos like this all the time and has a podcast about handhelds, when people come to me and ask me, which device should I get? Should I get, you know, a used 3DS off of eBay, or should I buy the AYN Thor? Pretty strong case to be made for the Thor, baby. I would probably point to that. At the end of the day, the answer to which device is best for playing dual-screen games isn't getting any simpler, but man, at least it's getting interesting. That's it for this one, folks. Do you already own one of these devices? Do you love it dearly? Do you hate it so much? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious what people's like setups are. What front ends are you using, et cetera, et cetera. I'm constantly experimenting with them, so let me know. And like, comment, subscribe if you haven't, and patreon.com/wavelengths, all that stuff. You know the drill. I'll see you in the next one. Mwah.